This week we welcome Dan back to the podcast to discuss Solar Mythology. This podcast was everything and more that I thought it would be. I really like talking to Dan. I love the way and how thoroughly he does his research. He comes with receipts, and he put mainly we focused on the story of Jesus. However, he put it in a way that I'd never heard before, running it through the Zodiac and just discussing the importance of the solar cycle, not only in the Abrahamic faiths, but all faiths. It was a very interesting conversation, and really a privilege and an honour to have Dan back on the show. Seems it's my turn to deal with the spicy cough. I'm okay, however, very interesting, been on a lot of vitamins and keeping my levels up to deal with it if it happens, so it's only been a couple of days and I'll be fine. However, interesting. Not enough to shut the planet down, however, interesting nonetheless. Different to anything I've experienced. I'm not a doctor, however, engineered seems to be the word because it was unlike anything I've ever experienced. So towards the end of this one, I do fade a little because I literally went to bed early, got up early to make sure I could speak to Dan. However, I'm still recovering, so appreciate your patience on that one. Don't have too much more. The episodes that are coming out at the moment are so excellent. And we've got so many AFSs in the background, the Earth's Forbidden Secrets. Got plenty there. However, with interviews like this, we have to bump these ones up the list. More fascinating conversations to come as well. It's such a good time here at the podcast, and I really appreciate your support. And remember to pass the word around. Let people know if you enjoy the show. The more people that know, the more we can advance the research here. Remember, we're on Patreon, Unlocking the Code. If you want to swing a couple of bucks our way, that'd be great. Please give us a review on any of the apps as well. We know that does help the algorithm. The podcast is, in the top percentage of a lot of podcasts these days overall. However, to get it to that next level would be really cool. And thank you very much to those that have been here from the beginning, and any new listeners, welcome. Not sure what music I'm going to go with tonight. So enjoy that, whatever it is. Please look after yourselves. The chaos continues. Stay safe, be kind, be cool, be disciplined, and we'll talk soon. Cheers. Welcome back, everyone. It's my great pleasure to bring back on the show Dan, all the way from Colorado. How are you, man?
I'm doing great, Triffin. How are you doing? Getting through it?
I'm getting through it, man. I'm recovering, mate. I'm recovering from the dreaded. But we won't even mention it, mate. We're just going to move on. I think we'll just keep going
Okay.
because we've got some interesting stuff. You're gonna talk to us today about solar mythology. We're basically going to unpack a lot of the religious context. Where are we going, mate? You'll be able to tell us better than me. So where are we going today?
Yeah. Well, yeah. So I think, our last conversation, I really enjoyed it. I think we did a great job of kind of exposing, the topic of conspiracy and control in a couple of ways. The first obviously is that conspiracies are real and have historically happened, and they weren't for the betterment of society. And I think we did a good job of laying that out, looking at
Yep.
that, and trying to create precedents for the fact that the government doesn't always love us and care about us, and sometimes they'll do what they have to do regardless to maintain power.
Mm,
And
mm.
we got into an element of control. We looked mostly at finance and got into the banking world and economics a little bit, and some of the kind of occult and secret societies. But I think this is kind of in addition to that conversation, in the sense that when we look back at control objectively, I think what we really find to be the villain of it all is organized religion. And it's a strange thing that the same organizations that have claimed to bring us human spirituality are the same organizations that seem to be have the dirtiest hands when it comes to crimes against humanity and in the kind of context of history.
Absolutely, absolutely. I
Yeah.
think
So
I
I'm
think
sorry.
is
Go ahead.
no, you're right, mate. Me and Dan are learning to give each other a second. That's what we're just learning from our last conversation, aren't we, mate? So,
Yeah.
um, I think when we talk about, I would question whether or not these things bring us human spirituality. I think they hijacked human spirituality. I think we talk about the God self, and they externalize the God self and then use that as a control mechanism. And I think everyone's got very short memories. Obviously, the religious context that's happened since 9/11, with that sort of stuff, and it goes back in history. And you're right, the religions have the dirtiest hands. And God loves you, but He needs your money. He's terrible with money.
Yeah.
And look, just so you, for the record, you blew the minds of a lot of the boys down here with the money thing that you went through with the Knights Templar, and it was an amazing episode. Those that haven't listened, please go back and listen to Conspiracy and Control. And it is externalizing. I think I'm interested to see where you go, mate. So I'm just going to pull your string and let you go. So where do you want to go, mate? Take us on a journey, and I'll just ask questions. And because from a personal standpoint, I spent a lot of my 20s studying religion,
Mhm.
looking into different religions. I've sat down and had conversations with people from multiple religions who were open to have those conversations. And I think, what is it, omniism, I think it's called, where it's like, I think there's truth to be found in them all. However, I also, one of the key areas of study here at the podcast is I see that once upon a time there was a universal religion that was based in science and spirituality, for want of a better term, that was actually more in line with us, that was actually promoting the God self, that was actually promoting the inner work and all that sort of stuff, and understanding that you are the God, we are God, you are God, I am God. Whereas what these organized religions have done, is just externalize it and then use us for their own gain, really. So, and it does go back to sun worship. You can see up behind me, I was showing you Ra before we turned the mic on. That's where it's sort of, there's a lot of it that stems from that. But that Ra stems from where? From Sumeria, from, how far back do we go?
Yeah.
And theoretically, it's all sun worship. That's why all the megalithic structures align to solstices and they align to equinoxes. That's it. You're measuring the path of the sun or the moon, the cycles of time. Most religions were, or, you know, and again, I use religion, spiritual practices, I suppose is probably a better term, not religion, did honor the cycles, right? They looked at the equinox, the procession of the equinox. That's what I was looking for. Yeah, and that was what we were actually looking at to start with, and then somewhere along the way, it got all externalized, and the control came back into it, didn't it, mate? So take it away, sir. Take it away. Take us on a journey, man.
Well, I mean, I guess last time I was on, I didn't really talk much about myself, but just kind of give a little context to how this all kind of came about. I was looking when I was younger. I had a near-death experience when I was a kid, and since I've done research, I've found that can become a pretty common theme in people kind of developing a thirst and a curiosity for the spiritual. And as I got older and into my teenage years, I was hunting spirituality. I was brought up in Catholicism, confirmed Catholic. I went to a Catholic school when I was a kid, and like I heard you joking about on your podcast the other day. I was just confused. It was all ridiculous to me. And every time I asked a question, I got scolded for asking that question. And so
there's a few holes in this theory. Yeah. But they don't.
Yeah.
Yeah, look, I do feel sorry now. Looking back, I feel sorry for that young girl who was probably just been told to look after the 6-year-olds, and here's me, little smartass, trying to pull apart the Bible. Yeah, so I do feel sorry for her now. However, there's definitely some holes in the story for sure.
Yeah, Sister Mary didn't like me very much, and but it made me curious, and I went on a hunt, and unfortunately, being young and idealistic, I kind of found myself reading a lot of New Age spirituality, and it's when you read a lot of that stuff, it just strikes you like a bunch of charlatanism. It's a lot of like snake oil peddling, and so eventually I got wise enough to realize that I felt like it was a lot of BS, so I wanted to understand where the ideas came from that they were talking about. And I realized that they were just recycling esoteric philosophy. Yes. And so I started reading esoteric philosophy and I couldn't stop, and so that's kind of my background, is really strong into comparative religious studies and especially esoteric philosophy. And so when I got into control, it was like, once again, like, okay, you know what? I got to dive into religion if I want to write a book about, control and conspiracy. So I just went back to as far as I could and started researching what I could find out, to try to understand the evolution of it.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
And, the further I went back, I just kept finding all these similar patterns. And eventually, after recognizing these patterns enough and then doing enough research into it, I stumbled across the subject of solar mythology.
Yes.
And I just dived deep into that, trying to understand what the ideas were and what the suggestions were. And, I kind of went into it thinking that maybe I can debunk it or this, that, and the other. But at the end of the day, what we do know about religion is that, if I asked a scientist, hey, explain to me what you think about religion is, he would talk about a lot of things about, like you were talking about earlier, about sun cycles, lunar cycles, the harvest, especially the harvest.
Yep.
Right? I mean, when we were dependent upon the food we grew to survive, it was the most important thing.
Yeah.
And so all the way back through all the pagan religions, it became very clear to me that there was this same story being told again and again and again. And, when I looked back at one of the, the ideas of is just really the sun, I mean, if you think how crucial and important the sun is, it's absolutely fundamental in human survival. And if you can take a step back and look at it from the way, ancient man used to look at it, you can see that, every day it was a struggle of the light versus the dark.
Yes.
It was the day versus the night and the light versus the dark. And when the sun disappeared for the day, the night came out, and that's when the predators came out.
Yeah.
And, that's when things stopped growing for that period of time throughout the day. And so, they became to really identify with this pattern. And so what I've kind of stumbled into is just this idea of going all the way back, all the way to the beginning of pagan religion. I kept seeing the Christian narrative. And so I was trying to understand how the Christian narrative existed inside all the pagan religions that it fought and battled with for so long. So
I think I'm interested to see where you go. I remember you're giving me flashbacks when I was looking into all this stuff, looking into comparative religion.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember getting to a certain point. I mean, if you take away, it seems to be, light versus dark, but there's also the East versus West, right? So there's the Eastern religious philosophies, and then there's the Western religious philosophies. But it's all the same. That's what I sort of came to. It's like, hang on a minute.
Mm-hmm.
If you start looking, it's pretty much all the same. It's the same set of rules. It's the same things that these people were worshipping, and again, very much centered around the sun and the harvest and the light and the dark. And I mean, you talk about that the night is when the predators come out. That is still why we are scared of the dark. Like when children are scared of the monsters under the bed, that is literally because at night time the wolves would come and take your children. Like that's literally what used to happen, and that is a genetic echo going back who knows how many millennia. Like there's there, but it really, and like religious people don't like to hear you say that. I've said that to a few. Seems to be more like Christian faith, Catholic faith people. When you go, it's all the same. When you start pointing out Easter and Christmas and all these things, like no one's ever thought about why it's coming up now, isn't it? No one's ever thought about why the rabbit delivers eggs. I mean, they're both signs of fertility, aren't they? Once upon a time we'd eat the rabbit and keep the skin and make a glove out of it, and we'd paint the egg and we'd give it to our neighbor, but it was all signs of fertility for the coming harvest, before the winter set in, honoring the tree, bringing a tree inside your house. That's, the Christmas tree is, you're bringing a tree inside your house to honor the tree, and putting presents under the tree is honoring the tree spirits and decorating the tree. And you do that because it's at the, it's more of a northern hemisphere thing where you're from. And it's, this is the darkest of the night. And if we honor this tree, then when the light comes back, then the harvest will be fruitful. Like this is these are the processes. And I think the Catholic faith, or the Christian faith, which, we could argue stems from Egypt, which I'm interested to see where you go, does, to a degree, I think you'll find that they had to adapt that harvest symbology in order to convert the pagans. You know what I mean? It's like, okay, our God's got a holiday on the same day your God's got a holiday. What a coincidence, But no one wants to talk about it, So
they're all pagan festivals, all these holidays we're celebrating, and that's a lot about what we're going to talk about today, because in this struggle between dark and light is everything that humanity's ever written about or celebrated. I mean, it's good versus evil, it's heaven and hell, it's yin yang. The sun rises in the east, it sets in the west. It's the fundamental building block of life on earth. And without the sun, there is no life. It is the creator. God, the sun, is good. And night, after the sun sets, it travels the underworld, or under the world, right? Because it's moving through the sky, during the day, and then it's moving down underneath the world at night. And so therefore, evil is dark, and it's the dark side versus the force, as, we all know George Lucas was a big Joseph Campbell guy, and that's where all these ideas for those movies came from.
It's but the it's eternal also, battle.
Yeah, exactly. It's heaven and hell, it's things that are not just theologically opposite, but they're geometrically opposite. Heaven is up, hell is down. Heaven is and has always been up above, and hell is and has always been down below and under the earth. And you talked about Egyptian religion, and I think that's really, everything that I've studied, everything goes back to it. This, the battle of Horus and Seth is the first story of night versus day. And, they say that Seth's, even the name, Seth, he's originally called Set. Well, sunset, that's the idea. That's why we say sunset.
Yes, that's right.
And when we start to debunk or go through a lot of this stuff, we start to realize that all these words and ideas that our culture is built on is rooted in these things, which is why we say sunset, like I said. But it's funny because Seth stands at the bow of the boat of Ra, and he slays the enemies of Ra as the ship traverses the sky on its daily journey. So they make it very clear in Egyptian religion what these battles of good versus evil are. They're very upfront about it. And, you had the old gods, and then you had the battle in Egypt about the one true God versus the gods. And, that's a really interesting part of Egyptian history in general. But, to get away from, what you kind of see with this battle of Horus and Seth is the essence of it all. And I think the thing I found most interesting was, just diving into Horus a little bit and wanting to understand him. His story it's exactly Jesus's story.
Yes.
It's exactly the Christian story. Everything about it. And
it's all the same, man. It's all the same. All these guys, and it's not just Egypt. You start looking deeper into, there's the same story in Samaria. There's the same story in the Mediterranean, where it's like the god goes to sleep for 3 days, comes back. You know what I mean? Like, there's so many of that story is repeated over and over and over and over again. So it's like, is it the key details in the story that we need to focus on? Like, where are we at? Like, that's what I've looked at. So, okay, so if the same story is told over and over and over and over again, what are these key details? The deity dies and then he disappears, or he disappears for 3 days and then comes back. And, is that the sun disappearing for 3 days at a time? Like, has that happened in the past? Maybe not. I mean, you look at, the Roman Catholic thing's an interesting one. Like, if you theoretically, as the story goes, that the Roman Empire switched to Catholicism on a coin flip, practically. Basically, it was I think they were in a battle. I'm trying to remember I can't remember the details right now, but there was a battle. They lost the day before, and then the Catholic priest or the monk says, if you change to Catholicism, the one true God will guarantee you victory, right? And so basically, and that's it. That's in theory, that's the story of how the Roman Empire put on the jackboot of the Catholics put on the jackboot of the Roman Empire through a bet, for nothing, And you talk about Constantine. Constantine wasn't Catholic or Christian or whatever it is till his deathbed. So it's like, and he rewrote the Bible. Which is the one that we, a lot the modern one we use today. It's so fascinating, this stuff, mate. So where are we going to start, man? Where do you want to begin on this solar journey through time?
Well, I think you already said it. I think the important part is to understand what are all the common facts. Okay, so what do we know about all these different religious icons and what their story tells? And so I think the best way to dive into it is Horus. So Horus was born on December 25th of a virgin, Isis. He was there was a star in the east, which was Sirius. He was adored by 3 kings, the 3 magi. He was a teacher at 12. He was baptized and started his ministry at 30. He had 12 disciples. He performed miracles. He was called the Lamb of God, the Lamb of Light. He was crucified. He was dead for 3 days, and he was resurrected.
I'm sure I've heard that somewhere before.
Yeah, I mean, if it wasn't Jesus you're thinking of, it was Attis of Greece, who was born of a virgin, born on December 25th, crucified, dead for 3 days, resurrected. It was Krishna, born of a virgin, Devaka, star in the east, performed miracles, resurrected. It was Dionysus, born of a virgin, born on December 25th, performed miracles, King of Kings, Alpha and Omega, resurrected, and it doesn't stop there. I mean, Mithra has a very similar story. He was born of a virgin on December 25th. 12 disciples, performed miracles, dead for 3 days, resurrected. And obviously Sunday was the day of worship for Mithra, which we know to be the facts in other religions today. And there's no coincidence that Sunday comes from the day of the sun, right?
Yes.
So it's very clear. It's not even hidden. It just takes a little bit of understanding where the names for the days of the week come from. And then, of course, that leads us to Jesus, who is the ultimate solar Messiah. But a lot of these guys, and we could go on and on. I could list them for hours. It is everybody from Thor to Odin to Genghis Khan. I mean, just his historic figures, and you see this born of a virgin in ancient mythology. And interestingly enough, you'll see a lot of the names of the virgin mothers in these stories is always rooted in Ma, M-A, right? Which means mother. So you have Mary, and you have Mira in the Syrian myth, and Maya in the Greek myth, Maya in the Hindu. So, this never stops. It just keeps going. And are you trying to tell me that all of the mothers of all of the religious icons ever just happen to have the name mother?
Yes.
You know what I mean? So it's clearly a story and not historical fact. And for me, it was interesting. I started kind of going through the Bible again, and I'm going to refer to some notes here. Let me pull this up real quick.
Pull it up, mate.
John 8:12. Oh no, go ahead, please.
I was just thinking, Thor's Day, Thursday. You know what I mean? There's all these things, right?
Yep.
I think one of the people just don't understand the echoes and the genetic echoes through time that we literally deal with every single day through what we say, through naming things, through all that sort of stuff. Like there's the classic, knock on wood, for good luck. That's honoring the tree spirits, right? You were supposed to knock on wood and ask them and say, can you make sure this goes okay? And people do that today. I mean, I use that nearly every day in my class, knock on wood, knock, 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 There's so many echoes of this stuff. And you're right. I'd forgotten about a couple of those. And you could just keep going forever. It's like, virgin
Absolutely.
birth, teacher, went for 3 days, came back, miracles, and it's, what I find interesting though, and I'm wondering where you're going to go with it, is just the level of control that the ultimate that Jesus got. Like how did they obviously hooked into the right story and gave it the right caveats for it to really spread globally, didn't they? I mean, obviously it was the jackboot of the Roman Empire was the big one. However, still, like it captures people to this day.
Yeah, no, absolutely, man. And it's when you dive into if you just even look in the Bible, which there's so many mistranslations due to all the moving around through the languages, that a lot of the real information has been lost. But even if you look at the modern one, I mean, you see it again and again. And I just pulled this up. So like John 8:12, when Jesus spoke again to the people, he said, I am the light of the world. In other words, he's the sun. While I am in the world, I am the light of the world. The people living in darkness have a great light. On those living in the land in the shadows of death, a light has dawned. Matthew 17:2, his face shone like the sun. John 1:3-8 is through him all things were made. Without him, nothing was made that has been made. And I mean, there's 50 more here, and they all are basically admitting that Jesus is in fact the Son in this story. And so when we start to look at these similarities and try to understand why they exist in all these various religions, it becomes pretty easy to figure out when you just put a little bit of a look into it, which is for instance, why born of a virgin? Like that's always an interesting one. And when I looked into Jesus, the first thing is that Jesus, it's very hard to prove that Jesus was an actual person. That he, there's very few, nobody historically at the time, and the historical record is very thorough at that time during his life, but yet nobody talks about him. And it isn't until 70 years later that he pops up with Pliny the Younger, and there's like two more people, but they never refer to Jesus as Jesus. They refer to the Christos or the Anointed One. And there's maybe only a sentence or two you can find from each of these people. So it becomes really curious that there's no historical proof that Jesus ever existed, which, leads me to believe potentially he was more of a story or an analogy or a metaphor than he was an actual person.
Yeah. The other problem is, do you run into the Jesus thing? It's like crucifixions weren't crosses back then; they were T's, right? When you were crucified, it was not a cross; it was a T that you were crucified on, and that's pretty well documented as well. Like there's a lot of things that are crucial to the story that fall apart under not that much investigation. And again, it's just it's faith, isn't it? You're supposed to take it on faith. That's the you question these things to staunch religious people, and like, oh no, you don't have faith. You don't have faith. It's
right.
So, but it's like, no, well, I'm okay with it. I think the fundamentally the problem with Jesus for me is, let's pretend for a second that he was real, right? So he was a carpenter, so that means he was a tradie, right? So that means he got on the beers with his mates, and he made mistakes and he did all that sort of stuff. And it's the fact that we deify him as hanging from a cross, I think, is fairly morbid, right? If he was the cool guy we asked, I'd believe in a person much easier if it was, yeah, look, I had a bit of an interesting birth. I went on an interesting journey. All I did was trying to spread some love, man. I had a good time. I had some mates. I had a missus, and I was just trying to spread love, man. That's all I wanted to do. Love thy neighbor and love everyone. It's all cool. And I didn't die for your sins. I enjoyed the pleasures of the flesh, and I got hung for it, right?
Yeah.
And all I wanted to do was spread love. Okay, if that's the story, cool. I could probably get on board with that. But yeah, the symbology of the cross and just it's dark, man. It's dark. Like I imagine as well, when you start looking into religion, and I went to a couple of confirmations for some nephews of mine, right? Because my wife's family is religious still, and the words that they say, it's unbelievable. Like get thee Satan out of the air and blah blah blah. I was like, this is dark, man. Are you guys reading what's going on here? Like, but because it's indoctrinated, they just stand there and recite it like zombies. It's like you're actually, not only are you reciting some very dark words, and then there's power in reciting these words. However, you're casting a spell. Look, if you read this stuff, it's like, man, you guys it's some dark stuff. I think there's a much darker side to Catholicism and Christian faith that people don't want to acknowledge. It's like you talk about there's not a lot of evidence for Jesus to exist, yet they've got these like I can never remember what they're called. What are they? They're tokens, or it's like I've been to a few of these things where they got this little test tube. It's like, oh, this is the bit of a tooth from Father Pope Francis II or whatever. It's like, what are you doing with a bit of tooth in a jar, man? Like that's twisted. Icons, that's what they're called, aren't they? Icons or whatever they are. Yet, witchcraft is bad, but you're carrying around a bit of tooth in a jar, right?
Yeah.
What's the difference? You know what I mean? Like it's strange stuff, mate. Strange stuff.
I mean, the pagans used to make fun of the Christians for that stuff.
Absolutely,
They were like, look at these weirdos, I mean, now, they were also sacrificing people and they had their own things going on. But, I mean, it's an interesting thing to kind of see. But, you were talking about the cross, and I feel like we should probably touch on that real quick here, because a lot of what solar mythology is it's the belief that the story of Jesus and all these other gods is really the story of the sun moving through the zodiac throughout the course of a year. And so really what we can kind of take down and what we'll get through today is how Jesus' ministry was said to have been 1 year. And that happens to be obviously the length of the zodiac year. And so in a little while here we'll go through and I'll kind of show how it goes through all the signs of the zodiac and exactly what it all means and how this all came to be. But I've got some slides here that I want to kind of pull up of, what it means when we talk about the cross. So
yeah, let's do it, mate. Pull it
I'm
up.
going to pull this up here real quick just so people can see what we're talking about.
No worries. Do you know what? While you're doing that, do you know what's interesting is that no one knows who named the Zodiac.
Correct. And what I found fascinating with that is that sharing for you, sir?
Yeah, that's up there, mate. Yep.
Okay. Do I need to get that in full screen for us?
If you hit play, you should be able, it should maybe turn it into the slideshow.
Okay, let me do that. Yeah.
Yeah,
okay. There we go. Okay, perfect.
Perfect.
So this image here, I started this with is a picture that I saw recently online. It was on Twitter of a rare solar halo in Sweden.
Yes, I saw this. Yep.
If you notice it, it's a traditional solar cross, is what it is, and it made me start thinking that if I was ancient man, and I saw this effect, I would see this as a sign from God,
Absolutely.
and so there's no question as to when I see something like this where I understand the association to the religious iconography of the halo.
Yeah, it's also the medicine wheel as well. From a pagan tradition, they call it the medicine wheel. I mean, if you look at the Australia's Stonehenge, right, that was bulldozed in 46, at both ends of that massive stone arrangement was the medicine wheel, was the circle with the cross in it. You know what I mean? Yeah. I mean, that's oh, look, this is CNN.
Yeah, no, I wanted to. I wanted to talk to you about this just because I laughed when CNN launched their pay service, which I can't imagine who the hell would pay for this. But notice it's a Templar symbol.
I was just going to say red and white with the cross in there. Yeah.
And the cross, of course, which they are. They are. But here's the traditional cross of the Zodiac.
Yep.
So you've got the Earth moving through it here, or the sun, I'm sorry. And, you can see, all these signs are the constellations. And when we look up into the stars, the constellations don't actually look anything like this. They're just a couple of dots, right?
Yes.
So the question becomes, how did we turn a couple of dots into a guy pouring a pitcher of water, or a scorpion, or a crab, or whatever it is? And so, that raised a lot of questions for me to try to understand. But the circle and the cross, the cross of the Zodiac is something that's been around since the beginning of time, and we've seen it in all sorts of various forms. This is an Egyptian one.
Yep.
So if you look carefully at this, I know the image isn't that great when it got blown up a little bit, but the constellation are actually the same. So, the Zodiac is all these ideas of the Zodiac today originated in Egypt. And this is another Egyptian one.
They don't know. They don't know. It's like, who named the Zodiac the Zodiac? And like you said, the only description you come back with when you look into that, because I remember coming across this and going, what do you mean no one knows who named the Zodiac? And it's just the further you look back, the basic explanation is exactly what you said, Dan. It's since the beginning of time. That's it. That's the only. Since the beginning of time, we have understood that the Zodiac exists in the sky, and it's the same symbology. It's the same. Doesn't matter. It just, it's like, and it's one of the, that's, to me, is one of those things. It's like, so like the Atlantic Ocean. No one knows who named the Atlantic. No one knows, right? It's just the Atlantic, right? Yet we have the hubris to pretend that we know everything when we don't know basic things, like no one knows who named the Zodiac. It's the holes are interesting. But I've never seen that one though. That's interesting.
This is an Egyptian image, another version of the Egyptian image, and then this is another Egyptian one too, where you can see it really clearly. And this is a really old, great version of it. Definitely the same symbol. This one's from India. Again, you'll notice all the same constellations in here, even though, obviously society was completely different in India versus Egypt, and in a different time altogether. This is the Greek one right here.
Yep.
Yeah. So, I mean, there's no, and this is one of my favorite, the Christian Zodiac. So this one, they just go ahead and put Jesus as the sun right in the center of this one.
Oh, no point messing around with it.
Just get right to it, and then of course the Last Supper here with Mr. Da Vinci's famous painting.
Mm-hmm.
If you notice, you have Christ in the center, and then you have three or four groups of three disciples to the sides of him, representing the different quadrants of the cross of the Zodiac, I believe, is what Da Vinci was saying with this, although there's been lots of speculation with what Da Vinci was saying about these things.
Well, I mean, obviously it's there's Mary to his right there as well. I mean, that's everyone wants to say that it's so clearly a girl. Like when someone said to me, "Is there a girl in this picture?" I pointed out, I was like, "Yeah, that looks like a girl to his right there." If you want to go back there as well, you look at some of the iconography in that, like the three windows at the back there. That's all triptych echo stuff as well. That's all God self iconography and all that sort of stuff as well. That's all right, mate.
I'm kind of a layman with this. I apologize.
Keep going, man. Keep going. Keep going, man. It's all good.
But and then these are the famous old paintings of Jesus where he clearly has the cross of the Zodiac as a halo behind him, per that image that we were just looking at. And then anybody who understands pagan religion knows that the pagan cross here on the right is just the shorthand version of the cross of the Zodiac.
Yeah.
And when you look at it, you understand that, okay, this is the cross. It's I've got another one here. Oh, here's one of Jesus. Oh no, I'm sorry. That's not Jesus. That's Dionysus.
Oh, sorry.
So
right. Yeah.
This image predates Christianity. And it's Dionysus hanging on the cross with his legs in a similar way that Jesus would be depicted. And the seven stars above him and the moon, pretty Christian in its iconography, but, Greek Dionysian mystery religion there. And then, of course, you have the cross, the Egyptian cross.
The Ank's up there somewhere, mate.
Yes, sir. Yeah. And, so you at the very least understand that, in addition to the cross of the Zodiac, the Egyptians worshiped the cross, and that was pre-Christian. And then the wheel of life, or the wheel, the Dharma, a cross of the Zodiac essentially and its symbolism. And then these are a few others. We've got the Jainism swastika, which, of course, the Nazis picked up on. But the reason why the Nazis and why chose this is because if you look at a swastika, it's actually the cross in motion.
Yes.
So you can argue that it's the cross moving, right? And then down here, you've got some pagan symbols, very much rooted in the same ideas. And then this is a glyph here on the bottom right.
Yeah.
From a magic text. Something rooted in the ideas of that type of magic. And
as you say, a lot of people would understand it as the medicine wheel, right? So you're using the medicine wheel, and that is used alchemically, right? There's when you look into alchemy, that symbol is used a lot. All of those things, it's it echo through echo. I think. And again, it's a disservice to people because in our schooling system we don't learn any of this stuff, right? It's like, it's you believe in God, Jesus, all that sort of stuff. Well, no, hang on a minute. Well, there's symbolism and the same story echoing through time across the globe. Like, I wonder how much more open would people be if we understood the intricacies of the religious context that we're actually talking about. It's interesting, right? It's interesting.
But one of the things, so when we look back at these details, right, that are listed, why are they all born of a virgin? So we know that Jesus was said to have been born in Bethlehem. And I did some digging into this because I had remember reading some things that suggested that perhaps he wasn't born in Bethlehem. And interestingly enough, what I found was that according to the Israeli or the Israel Antiquities Authority, the IAA, there was no Bethlehem in Judea at the time of Jesus's birth.
Right.
Yeah. So, I mean, they mention it during the Iron period, but during the Herodian period or Herodian period, there was no mention of a Bethlehem in Galilee, which was where Jesus was supposed to be born. So the question becomes naturally then, why do we say Jesus was born in Bethlehem? But
That's a good question. Yeah.
yeah, what I found when I looked into it was, I just started with Bethlehem. What does it translate to? What does it mean? And
Mm-hmm.
it means the house of bread. And when you look into the idea of the house of bread, you realize that that's a reference to Virgo the Virgin. The Virgo is often depicted as a virgin holding a chaff of wheat.
Yes.
And the reason that it's done so is because Virgo is actually the sign that would be during the time later in September, when we're actually harvesting the crop. So yeah, so it makes sense to say that
Jesus was a Virgo. That's what we're saying.
This is a reference, right? Because he was bringing, he was the sun's fruit, and he was bringing all this. So that was something I found to be super interesting. And it's also interesting to note that when you look back and you want to understand when Jesus was born, we know that the December 25th date was adopted because of all the pagan holidays that existed at the time. But when you go through all the scripture, you kind of see a couple of different hints that, and some of it doesn't agree with each other, but it's most likely, if you read Luke chapter 1, he gives a timeline of Jesus's conception, and he was most likely born in the fall of September between 21 to 24 of AD, because his cousin John the Baptist was born earlier in spring of March. So Jesus was born 6 months later in September AD, which again points to that yearly cycle in Virgo the Virgin. So, to say that Jesus was born of the Virgin is arguably through these connections. And this is the biggest leap of faith you have to make when you look at this stuff.
Yeah.
So if you can accept that, the rest of it's easy. Because when we look at, a lot of these other ideas, the 12 disciples are clearly the 12 constellations of the Zodiac. And, some of these other ideas, one thing I wanted to understand was, okay, well, we celebrate Jesus's death and resurrection in the spring, right? So if you're trying to figure out where the year starts, you've got a couple options. One would be the winter solstice. One would be the spring equinox. And so, it makes sense that what happened was these stories got pulled together. Because what I really wanted to understand was the death and resurrection story. I mean, there are billions of people on this planet that believe that a man was, crucified and then was dead for 3 days and then, was resurrected and hung out on earth for a little bit and made some moves and then ascended into heaven. So I wanted to understand that. And as I started looking into this stuff, it had to get a little wonky for a little while, because, you got to understand where people are coming from at this time. So if you go back and you kind of look at where the stars were and how they were moving back 2,000 years ago at the time that these books would have been written, if you look at it from that perspective, then you can really trace yourself through the Zodiac accurately.
Yeah.
Because one of the things I find interesting is all the people that believe in, kind of this astrology. Like, for instance, I was born on June 1st, so that makes me a Gemini. But if you look at where the stars were on the day I was actually born, I'm not a Gemini. I would be, I believe I would be a Cancer.
Wasn't it that's you're looking at, that's your rising sign. And so, yeah, it's like there's the date that you were born. And then when you get your astrology done correctly, they're looking at your rising house. So where the stars were.
Right.
And then your where was the moon as well. And that's your rising sign and your waning sign. I'm trying to remember now, but yeah, when you get your
Yeah, or sun
astrology,
sign and moon sign.
sun
Yeah,
sign, moon sign, and
yeah,
then there's a couple of different, which house are you passing through when you were born? When you get your astrology done correctly, you get your numbers done correctly. They go through all of that. Yeah, your sun
yeah,
sign, your moon sign, your actual
yeah.
sign, and astrology is one of those interesting things, man. It's like everyone poo-poos it, but it's literally the oldest thing that we have. There is nothing else. No one knows who named the zodiac. Everybody paid attention to it, and it still blows me away too. Like if you're going to walk yourself through the zodiac 2,000 years ago, then how did they know? Like technically there was no telescopes, like what are we even talking about here for them to
Right.
be able to understand what they were talking about? Is it myth and legend or that's come back through for them to understand that, or did they have the ability to observe it? Were they using these old temples to observe it? Like there's so many questions, so many
Well,
questions.
yeah, no, and the cool thing about the watching this happen as the constellations move through based on the time of year. Um, so the point I was trying to make is uh, essentially we're using a zodiac from 6th century. So for some reason today, even though we look at astrology as to where everything was, we're really looking at where it was in 6th century, because that's when the kind of accepted modern day version of the zodiac was put into place, because everything based on the rotation of the earth and time passing and the precession of the equinoxes, which is really important to understand because it's a 26,000 year cycle. That's what I'm saying. Like, I'm not actually a Gemini. I was actually born in a different constellation, but because when we think about astrology and the zodiac, we're looking at this 6th century version.
Really?
And
Okay.
we're also looking at it from where these people were, which was, the latitude of the Holy Lands, because you had Jerusalem was in about 25 to 50 degrees, north.
Yep.
So on the kind of, breakdown of everything, I know you're in one of the rare places where there's actually people in the southern part, because most of civilization has occurred in that very narrow band in the north.
Yes.
And so we have to kind of look at how they were looking at it at that time to kind of understand how this mythology plays out.
So just expand for me for a second, just so I can grasp it a bit more.
Yeah.
When you say we're dealing with a zodiac or the wheel from the 6th century, what do you mean by that? Like, is that the common thing that astrology is used for today comes from the 6th century? Is that what you're saying?
Correct. So because so I guess we have to kind of back up here for a second and talk about the ages. So where well, I guess maybe we should just go all the way back to the beginning. But all right. So let me give you a long answer to get there, right?
Yeah, no worries. There are no short answers, Dan.
Yeah,
there's no short answers, mate.
I know. So we think about high noon, right? So the term high noon is when the sun is essentially in between where it rises in the east and sets in the west. It's at its highest point of the day. Which is how people used to set their clocks,
Yes.
So they didn't have all the tech we did. So they would realize that, when the sun's at its highest based on observation, that's high noon. And that's why clock hands both point up, directly up at noon. And that's where all that comes from. And that's why when you look at a sundial, the way that the shadow moves around the sundial is how we came up with what today is known as clockwise, right?
Yep.
In the northern hemisphere. So, again, where most of these cultures were thriving and observing and coming up with these ideas. And then, I was talking about the latitude of the Holy Land, where you have to consider the latitude of the time of year, right? Because as you move all the way up north to the Arctic, there's basically 1 6-month period of darkness, 1 6-month period of light. And then, as you move down, those start to get longer and longer because you have to take into consideration the wobble of the earth as it's spinning. I realize that's that's a little bit confusing and a little wonky, but that gets us to this idea eventually. Because from there we're trying to figure out, what it means to observe from the northern hemisphere and understand the Earth's precession in the stars. Because it is like a gyroscope. So, 2,000 years ago, the celestial North Pole was not where the star Polaris is today. The celestial North Pole is very close to Polaris now. And we call Polaris the North Star because if you can find it and point it out, you're pointing north, right?
Yeah.
But at 0 AD, the celestial North Pole was actually between the Big Dipper and the Little Dipper. Does that make sense?
Yep, absolutely.
So, when you apply that to the idea of astrology, it's the same idea, right? It wouldn't be in the same place as when it was first designated. It's moved on based on the precession. So
precession of the equinox, 1 degree every 72 years, that sort of stuff. Yep.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. And so, you've got the second difference is 2,000 years ago, the sun was entering Capricorn on December 22nd, whereas today the sun doesn't arrive at that position until January 18th, almost a month later. So, it's just, we have to think about this in terms of how they were observing it. And, our current calendar is, it keeps track of the solar year and not very well also, as you know, right?
No.
We have to use leap year and all this really confusing stuff.
Well, there's an interesting concept where it used to be 360 days, like something happened and the solar year got stretched by 3 days or 4 days.
Correct.
Because the Sumerian stuff's all based around 12. That's how come we have 60 seconds. That's how come we have 360 degrees. That's all Sumerian stuff. And it would make sense that once upon a time, the year was 360 days because that's a circle, because we're tracking that thing. And something happened to the Earth or to the orbit or something like that, which extended the day. Because, the calendar's not exact. It's right. It's an interesting thing. It's also you talk about the Zodiac. There's also Ophiuchus, the serpent, was in there somewhere as well. The 13th.
Draco.
Draco or Ophiuchus is another one.
It has a lot of names.
But the serpent. Anyway, it's like there was the serpent was once upon a time in that wheel somewhere along there. Who knows how long ago? But once upon a time, there was a. And the serpent's an interesting one too. You want to get into that, like the mythology of the serpent. Like that's all through Catholicism and all that sort of stuff. It's so it makes you wonder, when did they change that or why? There's so many questions.
Yeah, no, there's a great book by a fantastic esoteric philosopher named Mark Booth. It's called the Secret History of the World as Laid Down by Secret Societies, and he goes deep into explaining to the layman what the esoteric secret societies teach to their initiates about history. And it's a wildly different version of history than we've been told.
Unbelievable.
And the serpent is a huge part of that story.
Massive.
Yeah, and he does a great job of getting into the details. I highly recommend that book to anybody who wants to understand what the secret societies teach their initiates. But just to jump back to the solar mythology for a minute. So
sorry, mate. It's such a fascinating topic. There's so many.
And it's all interwoven, right?
Yeah,
I mean, this all connects.
Yeah.
By the time we're done, it's just all linked together. So but if we look at the seasons of the year, we know that the sidereal year begins on the winter solstice, December 21st, and is the beginning of winter, right? So the winter solstice is the shortest day of the year.
Yep.
Sun rises south of due east and sets south of due west.
Yep.
It's at a low angle in the sky because the days are short.
Yep.
And it's cold during winter, and it rains a lot during winter. And then you've got the spring equinox, which as the year progresses, the days get longer and longer. Each day the sun rises and sets slightly and is farther north than it was the day before. And the summer solstice, as the year progresses, the days continue to get longer, and each day the sun rises farther north of due east.
Yep.
And then, in the autumn after the summer solstice, the days begin to get shorter, and each day the sun rises and sets slightly farther south.
Yep.
So just to kind of paint that picture of how, how this all kind of comes together.
Which you are,
and then
if you do that, you are making the cross again, aren't you? That's the thing too.
you are, yeah, you absolutely are. And, it's, and then we have to think about the celestial sphere, because the way that, the man claimed before Galileo was that the earth, as you know, was the center of the universe. And so we
still
had
is to some people.
Yeah, exactly. And these ideas of what the stars were is, these people, the ancients, believed that there was some sphere moving around called the celestial sphere around the earth, and then Galileo was like, nah, I don't think that's what's going on. I think here's what was going on. And then, of course, he was extremely, was Galileo put to death for that? I can't remember if he was actually put to death or not for that.
I think he might have been. It was one of them was.
I know he was put on trial.
He was put on trial. I don't know whether he was hung for it, but yeah, I do. Yeah, we should know that, but we don't. That's okay. But yeah, Galileo, he was ostracized for sure. He was. Look, a lot of these basic principles we accept as fact now, people were burned at the stake for even mentioning that could be true, and it's crazy,
No, it's wild for sure. And, this research was really interesting for me because, if you look at you talked about the 360 days, a lot of the stuff that I've read says that, I've heard what you were saying. I've also heard that it was just a nice round number. Yeah. And because if you look at a circle has 360 degrees.
And but the only way we know that is through the Sumerian texts, right? And that because they operate on 12, but it's the 12 bits of your fingers as well. That's another way to look at it as well. Like there's all these different interpretations. Yeah. But yeah, 360 understanding pi and all that sort of stuff. The Sumerians understood all that a long time before the Greeks did. That's another thing. It's like we got all our mathematics from Greece. And look, I'm Greek. I can say this. There's every chance that the Greeks stole it, right, from Sumerians. Yeah. You know what I mean? I don't think they discovered it. I think they stole it. But anyway, it goes back a lot further than we can even begin to imagine. Yeah.
So if you're willing to try to figure out where to start the year, if you're looking at the Zodiac, I think the winter solstice is what, most people agree would be the kind of starting point for it. Mm-hmm. If you're not going to take the vernal equinox. And so, it was interesting because the Gregorian calendar, if we look at the Mayan calendar was absolutely perfect, I guess, down to minutes.
Yes.
It's so accurate. And lunar cycle, the lunar calendar is much more accurate than the solar calendar is. Yeah. So, the question becomes, why did the Julian calendar get put into place? And, after researching this pretty extensively, I feel that there's a lot of proof that it was to guide this idea that this is all rooted in. Okay. Because the solar year is able to relate this mythology accurately.
Okay.
So, the sun is born or reborn on December 25th. And numerous pagan solar religions celebrate this as the birth of their sun god.
Yes, they do. Yeah.
Yeah. So, what Christians don't realize is how much of their religion is borrowed by pagan religions.
Oh, they don't like it. Don't point it out. They don't like that.
No, they don't. And, there are, it's funny enough, there are a lot, there's a lot of Christian apologists. Like if you look back at Justin Martyr, he was around in 100 AD. So he was one of the first kind of forefathers of the Christian movement. Mm-hmm. And one of the things he had to answer for was the fact that Christianity was so similar to all the other religions. And so he goes through and he points out, if you go and look at his apology, because he's a Christian apologist, right? If you read his apology, you see that essentially he admits all these similarities. He brings up Mithra and Krishna and the Roman gods and all these similarities in the story. And he says, because he has to say something, the only thing that he can pitch to people about why this is he basically said that the devil was so aware that Christianity was coming that the devil went before Christianity and then implanted all of these stories by his demons into history. So
of course he did.
It's like God hiding dinosaur bones, to test our faith.
To test our faith, that's exactly right.
That's all he's got, man. I mean, and he literally says it. You can go back and read that, and he says, "Listen, the devil did it."
Devil did it. Devil came down from Georgia. Devil came down from Georgia, and he did all these things. He did.
And it's hilarious to me, because I'm looking at this like, you got to be kidding me. You know what I mean? So. And there's a lot of Christian apologists that have admitted this over the centuries and over the years. And this keeps getting forgotten again and again. So we're talking about it today again. You know what I mean? And
I think it does. One of the things, obviously, you've been following the triptych research that I've been doing, and that sort of it's on the back burner sort of, where once we get through the Forbidden Secrets book, we're going to dig deep into Casaro's work, and I've got a few other guys doing some work around that. However, it seems that, it's always the devil, right? Because, I mean, if you look back at the pagan religions and the multi-gods as opposed to the one God, but even in the early Bible, it does say gods. It doesn't say God. You know what I mean? There is references. I think a lot of this was also to externalize the God self as well, Dan. I think if you look at the pagan gods, or the Grecan gods, or the Roman gods, or the Egyptian gods, for that matter, they weren't externalizing the God self. They were, depending on whichever deity you chose to worship, they encouraged you to be the best version of yourself, right? They use the teachings from whichever god you wanted to pick, and using those teachings to improve yourself, as opposed to the Christian faith, whereas you will never achieve God's self. You will never actually be worthy of being the Son. And, then therefore you must, bow down, whereas a lot of the pagan religions, they had their, as I say, they weren't exactly, like you said, there was sacrifice and all these sorts of things. However, it was all about being the best version of you. It wasn't necessarily about becoming God or becoming sinless or whatever it is. And I think there's a big part of that as well,
Yeah. And appeasing the gods, right? I mean,
appeasing the gods.
If you want a good harvest, you have to appease the gods. And, it's interesting because, it's important to figure out where the cross, where this zodiac starts, right? So, my argument is it starts, after the solstice, which would be in Capricorn. So if you take the zodiac and you put it in order, what you find is Capricorn is at 30 degrees. And so you've got this idea where, the sun or Jesus enters Aquarius from Capricorn at the age of 30. Which is this 30 degree age 30 correlation.
Right.
And there's a tradition rooted in that. Like I said, the 360 degrees of a circle and all this stuff. And then, as the sun passes through Capricorn, traveling the 30 degrees in 30 days to reach Aquarius, you have the beginning of the sun's annual journey around the zodiac. And that would be also, as we dig into this Jesus story, the correlation of Jesus's 1 year ministry, right? So he at the age of 30 was baptized by John the Baptist. You have baptism, you have the house of Aquarius, which is symbolized by a man pouring a water pitcher, the water bearer. So you have this very clear correlation between John the Baptist and Aquarius.
And what was his first? I see where you're going, because one of his first miracles was to do with fish, wasn't it?
Right, because when you move in, eventually you get to Pisces, right? And we haven't even talked about the ages yet, the reverse procession, where that's a huge thing, right? Because the ages are very important in that respect. But let me keep going on this, and then we'll get there.
Keep going. Sorry, I'm joining dots.
No, it's trust me, this stuff like lit my mind up when I started understanding it. It really, really got me excited, you know. So, you know, you've got John the Baptist, and he baptizes with water. This is the time of year in winter where, depending on where you're at, a lot of rain comes, especially when you're looking at it from that perspective of the Holy Land. And then after that, you've got this this idea of, now, you know, near the beginning of any long and difficult journey, such as the one is, you know, the sun is taking, there's a temptation in the olden days, a belief, a temptation to be lazy. So it's like, why should the sun like embark on such a long, difficult journey of climbing higher and higher into the sky each day, and all these ideas. So, you know, that I found interesting. And then there's a correlation with this temptation to give into the forces of darkness, and the resistance to that temptation, you know, which is why you kind of have this idea of, you know, of essentially Jesus encountering out in the desert Satan and being tempted. Right? He's tempted to leave his journey, and you know, Satan, who's the adversary or the darkness, you know, offers him this alternative to going on with his mission. But Jesus decides that he's not going to do that. He's going to do the right thing. He's going to push on. So the sun leaves Aquarius, and then Aquarius is figuratively put in the prison. And if you remember the story, right, after Jesus visits John the Baptist, John the Baptist gets put into prison, and then Jesus went to Galilee. So, you know, for whatever, you know, John the Baptist gets thrown in prison, and Jesus is like, no big deal, I got stuff to do. So he leaves.
Sorry,
and
mate.
You know, he goes on his merry way, you know. So you kind of start to see this story play out and really start to make some sense in terms of where it's going. And you know, so now he decides that he's on his way to Galilee. And I guess maybe this is a good time to just kind of point out the procession of the equinoxes really quick, right? So as we watch the zodiac kind of move clockwise, if we're observing long-term like the Mayans did, the procession of the equinoxes, which moves backwards in 2,150 year cycles. And if you go back and you kind of look at that, you see another solar kind of astrological metaphor, where you have the Old Testament starting in the days of, you know, if you go back and you look at the Moses story, right? And you look at that real closely, you see that there's, it takes place in the age of Taurus. So this is like 4,300 BC to 2150 BC. And Moses comes down from Mount Sinai, and he finds the Israelites worshiping a false idol, sometimes described as a golden calf or a golden bull. And it's the bull because it's Taurus. So the Israelites are worshiping the age of Taurus, and then Moses brings the law in the form of the Ten Commandments and ushers in the new age of Aries, which is 2150 to 180. Interesting to note, there is no 0 AD or 0 BC because the solar year and the solar calendar has to account for those leap years. So they do it all at once. So you've got the age of Aries ushered in by Moses' 10 Commandments, which is the age of the ram, which is why the Israelites are said to blow the ram's horn.
That's right.
Mithra, he killed the bull to usher in the new age.
And it's also you go back to those times. A lot of the pagan symbology from all around the world is actually related to bull as well, right? There's all this, you know, it's not just all these cultures were worshipping that Taurus, that bull, you know, there's so much symbology.
The Minotaur, right?
The Minotaur, exactly. Spot on.
And what you find is Moses is this, he's in a long line of lawgivers, which I found to be really interesting. So if you look at Moses' story, and if you look at the first emperor of Mesopotamia, so arguably the first emperor in general, you've got Sargon of Akkad, and you find that Sargon's story is the exact same story as Moses. He was like, he had to avoid infanticide, so he was put in a reed basket and found by royals. and then he was, raised by royalty, and he eventually brought, these laws as well.
Mm-hmm.
And it's really interesting when you look at the names of the lawgivers. You've got Manu of India, Minos of Crete, Mysis of Egypt, and then Moses of Israel. So you got Manu, Minos, Mysis, Moses.
All the same.
Right,
yep.
right.
Yep.
And, if you go back and you look at the 10 Commandments and you take a good look at the Egyptian Book of the Dead, you realize that a lot of these commandments were laws that were handed down by the Egyptian Book of the Dead.
Yes. Yes.
So, more proof, in my opinion, that the Egyptian religion is a precursor to Judaism and Christianity, Islam, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah, of course it is. I think when you find that the 10 Commandments, what I also is the rules are the rules, Dan. You know what I mean? Yeah. It's like, it doesn't matter what the religion is, doesn't matter where you're from, doesn't matter who you are, doesn't matter what, color, creed, religion, doesn't matter. The rules are the rules, right? Yeah. Treat everyone as the golden rule is always the golden rule. Treat others how you wish to be treated. It doesn't matter what religion it is. It doesn't matter how many thousands of millennia you go back. That's the rule, right? And it's just you could almost begin to ask the question whether or not this is a universal story that's being passed down from generation to generation. And I think maybe we've lost the true meaning of the story because we've it's turned into a control mechanism. However, I think, be decent, make sure you honor the sun, make sure you pay attention to the sky, all these things. This is all part of that, as I say, that universal religion, I think, that once existed, that governed our existence globally, not just, section to section. But it's, as with all things, the human takes it and manipulates it and changes it. However, there's a purity to the story, I think, which echoes through the time.
No, I agree with you, man. And, it's this procession of the equinoxes, these ages are pretty clear. And like you were saying, the next age after, the Aries is the age of Pisces, right?
Yep.
So you've got Pisces, the age of Pisces from 1 AD to 2150 AD. And, 1 AD is obviously Jesus's supposed birth year.
Yep.
And, Jesus said, I will be with you until the end of the world, except that world is a mistranslation. And the word is actually aeon, which translates to age. Mm-hmm. So Jesus was being very literal and saying that I will be with you until the end of the age, which is 2150. Mm-hmm. Right. So like you were saying, the symbolism of Pisces is all over the place in the New Testament. You have fishermen, you have him, feeding everyone with fish. It's, so this is a very clear in terms of that.
We see it down here as well, like cars that are religious, they have the little fish emblem on the back of their car. You know what I mean? They've got the little sticker, right? It's still to today, right? And people don't
and where did that
them.
come from, right?
Exactly. And I think one of the, we talk about the procession of the equinox. Not only, we're coming to an end of a few different cycles during our lifetime, Dan, and I think that's one of them, we are at we're coming back around to the end of the last great cycle, you talk about, you want to expand the procession of equinox a lot further than that. 12,800 years ago, that's when the cataclysm happened, which is half a cycle of the equinox ago. So we are coming back around to the top of the cycle, and that would be deemed to be something very important to these ancient people.
Absolutely.
They keep an eye on that stuff. Like there's many, the Mayan calendar, we're coming to the end of the Mayan. You talk about the Mayan calendar and the sun disk and all that sort of stuff, right? They're very, very accurate. And, and yes, they say that this period, 1960 to 2040 or whatever it is, I think they worked it out to be, is the end of the cycle. That's it. Yeah. We're coming to the end of all the cycles that the ancients laid out for us,
Yep. And there's a lot of debate. Some people say 2040, some people say 2150 is the age of Aquarius.
Yeah.
But there's some people say 2012 was the beginning of the age of Aquarius. So there's a lot of, it's all based, that's a little loose. But, when you're talking about the disasters, I mean, if you look at Noah's flood in the Bible, and then you go back to the Epic of Gilgamesh, well, you have the exact same story being told pre-Christian, in Sumerian culture, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
So it's the same damn story just being recycled and being passed on so that people can kind of learn from
even the Mayan culture, you know what I mean? They say that, massive flood came from the north and destroyed them. It's the same flood myth, like the rainbow serpent here in Australia. This is the indigenous Australians talking about a flood myth. I mean, that's potentially the oldest culture on the planet, and they have a flood myth. Every major culture has a flood myth. Every major culture has this rebirth, has this,
right.
The one that I like to always point out is that God's always a bearded man, right? Have you ever thought about that, right? Zeus is a bearded man, name it, Apollo, name it. Even again in indigenous culture down here, a wise man is said to be a tall bearded man. Like everything, what does that mean? Does that mean the bearded man came across the ocean and told us what was going on, and we then deified that person after the cataclysm? Like, it's interesting. Like, it's all, the connections are all there. They're all there. They all come back together. I think, you talk about the Egyptians, you talk about Sumerians, you could say what came first, the chicken or the egg. I'm not sure. I'm not sure who influenced who. You know what I mean? It's an interesting question.
Well, all right. So to go back to this before I get too far off. If we go back and we think about the yearly procession and, we move out of Aquarius, we move coincidentally into Pisces. So now we're not talking about the 26,000 procession years of procession. Now we're just talking about the 1 year. So you move into Pisces and you look at the Jesus story and you see that he meets the fishermen, right? And Simon and Peter. And, then you have all of these very, themes again. So it's like, you can see how these ideas are unfolding in both kind of areas, which I find to be super interesting because they're going, it's showing you this story to where it just keeps taking you through, and then after Pisces, the sun enters Aries, the ram, and the traditional date of this is the vernal equinox, March 21st. And, kind of interesting because, sin means a deviation from the way things ought to be. And the sin of the earth was that it was cold and dark during autumn and winter. And we would prefer it to be warm and light, So when you get into Aries, you get into the Lamb. And this is where, we think of all these, religious leaders, beyond Jesus that were called the Lamb of God, or, and you find all these pictures of Jesus with a lamb draped over him and all these different things, which are really interesting. But, so you're kind of getting this story and it just keeps going. And then, Easter, which has the word East in it, is what we celebrate when Jesus is risen from the grave. And we're celebrating the first full moon after the vernal equinox. With the rebirth of the sun and the sun overpowering the cold and the darkness of winter. And, this symbolism gets real obvious,
Which you guys are going through right now, aren't you? I mean, you guys are coming out. Yeah.
We're right there right now.
It's the thing. It's the opposite for me, right? So things are getting, the last few weeks, the weather has turned.
Right.
The days are getting shorter. I'm sitting today in a flannel because it's cool enough for me to sit here in long sleeves. So it's interesting. And what we find down here, obviously, the Americanization of the global society is something. However, for those of us that observe the old ways down here, we've got to do it all backwards, right? Because our winter solstice is June 21st, right? As opposed to that's your summer solstice, right? So that's our shortest day of the year, your longest day of the year, and then it reverses itself in December. So we still do observe that. We've had a few winter solstice celebrations down here and all that sort of stuff because of the old ways. However, it's fascinating that you've got to, and people don't, you find out how much esoteric knowledge people have, right? Because they're celebrating the solstice in June in Australia, but they're doing the summer solstice celebration. So, well, obviously you don't have esoteric that much knowledge. You're just grabbing onto it because it's not right. We're doing the winter solstice here. It's not the summer solstice,
Right.
But yeah, observing all those things is interesting. So what, Pisces? Where are we? So we go Pisces,
So
and he goes into the Lamb of God. And I'm trying to think about where it goes. It's interesting.
yeah, so if we kind of look at that springtime, right, it's kind of the end of the stormy weather. And in Matthew, you have this story of Jesus calming the storm, right? So the sun, he calms the storm, and then you start moving into Taurus after that. And we've already talked about the bull being worshipped, and all these same ideas come up again. And it's interesting because there are no bulls in the Gospels per se, but there's also not any crabs or scorpions either. But you do find those ideas in Revelations, which I think is interesting. And there's a whole nother bit about Revelations that we can get into as well, where that becomes an astrological metaphor also,
But correct me if I'm wrong, the Revelations weren't written till much later, though. Look, I mean, this is all being written retrospectively as well, isn't it? Like 70 years later?
Yeah, and we're not clear, there's so much debate around the Gospels and who wrote them. And, so, there's so many mysteries hidden there, to where if you were creating a story to control people, you would want that all to be murky and not understood very well. And the Catholic Church has firm beliefs that it was this person or that person, but when you look back from a history perspective, you don't really get a clear answer.
No, it's another, it's like the rest of it, Dan. You dig into it and it's made on a bed of sand. There's no real substance to it apart from just believe me, that's it. This is what it is. But why? No, don't ask why. It just is.
Right.
Yeah.
Yep. And and so as we keep kind of following this story and putting in perspective of the Jesus story, we get to the next part is we get to the head of Aquarius, where essentially John the Baptist is beheaded, right? So if we follow the Jesus story, we come to the beheading, and John the Baptist is like our personification of Aquarius, as we've already established. And then Herod, beheads him. And Herod is, represented in this as the personification of night and evil, and the cold, the darkness, and all of these things, So it's interesting because what we do see from a, astronomical perspective is that the head of Aquarius rises from below the eastern horizon in this next phase, right? So it appears that it's beheaded by the horizon. So this story again stays consistently into the narrative, and then after you get through that story with Jesus, I think the next one of importance in Matthew is about Jesus walking on water. And it's interesting because after you move out from, so you've got the head of, the beheading of Aquarius, and then you've got, you've got the Milky Way that starts to come through right after Taurus the bull, with that starry band, right? That that lake of the night sky.
Yes. Yeah.
And that's around May 20th, I think, like kind of May, June. So in a sense, you argue that the sun, right, is, if you're observing it, is set against the Milky Way. So you have the sun walking on water. In the story, right? It's like, you just keep going with this. And, the next thing you bump into is this summer solstice. So, you've got the sun starts to reach its highest point. And, in the Jesus story in Matthew, we find the transfiguration of Jesus, where, he is said to ascend the mountaintop, and he meets Moses and Elijah. And then he returns and he's glowing. His skin is glowing because he's been transfigured. And, it's this really powerful imagery that seems to kind of, speak to the sun shining at its highest, right?
Yeah.
In the kind of story.
Yeah.
And so it just keeps staying consistent all the way through it. And then you hit summertime, and interesting thing about the summertime metaphor is you've got if you look back to the Babylonian zodiac,
Mm-hmm.
you find the sign for the house of Cancer was an ass and a foal, right? So two bright stars in the constellation of Cancer, which still bear the names, are the northern ass and the southern ass.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, so
we didn't even get to the Babylonians. I forgot about the Babylonians.
Yeah, but that ties in this part, because when Jesus arrives in Jerusalem, he's said to be riding an ass and a colt.
Yes.
And if you think about the literalness of this, how the hell does Jesus sit on a donkey, and a colt simultaneously as he travels, right? So it doesn't make any sense literally, but from this solar mythology idea, it becomes very figurative and very much makes sense based on, the Babylonian zodiac and understanding how that fits in.
Yeah, right. Okay.
So it just keeps going, and going and going and going. And then, you get into, after that, harvest time, right? So this gets us back to the house of Virgo, the Virgin.
Yeah.
And, the days have started getting shorter now. And, sometimes Virgo's depicted with holding an ear of corn instead of wheat, right? So it's very clearly celebrated as the harvest, and the Mother Earth bringing food. And
wow.
There's also some little bit of a kind of the Virgin idea of, instead of being a feminine she's almost like a sexless kind of it, in the kind of, when you read through some of the more traditional stuff. And that leads us into the scales of justice, which is the sun moving from Virgo into Libra.
Mm-hmm.
And, when Jesus entered the temple area and drove out the money changers, the way you can read into that from a historical perspective was that essentially the money collectors were in the temple because it was the harvest money that they were trading, right? So when he essentially chases them out, really what the solar metaphor is saying is that basically the money changers made all their transactions because they were done selling the harvest and then moved on.
Yeah, right. Okay. Yeah.
Yeah. So, the sun chased out the money changers is the metaphor in this idea.
Mm-hmm.
And if you think about all the holidays, right, we give Thanksgiving that here in America, which is a celebration of the harvest. And this is really rooted in pagan religion, this celebration of being able to celebrate what you've brought in and what you've grown.
Yeah.
So it keeps staying pretty consistent. And then, in late October, you get into Scorpio. And, interestingly enough, this gets into a little bit of Arabic, where you've got El Akrab, which means it's wounding him that cometh, interestingly enough. And then you've got the scorpion figuratively stinging the sun, the way it looks with the constellations, which you can make then, a pretty easy leap over to the story of the betrayal by Judas, one of the 12 disciples. So, interestingly enough, too, is you've got, if you go back to Egyptian religion, I think Horus was also betrayed, if I'm getting this one right, by Judah, not Judas.
Yeah, Judah, I think. Yeah. I think so. I think
you're right. There's a I might be getting this a little bit wrong, but I know there's a correlation there. That kind of this, and the cool thing that when you think about this, everybody, if you're following the Jesus story and Jesus is preaching and he's stirring up all these problems, everybody should know who Jesus is. But according to scripture, Pilate has to basically bribe Judas to tell him who Jesus is. Like he can't figure out it's the guy talking to thousands of people. I guess, you know, so
But
it's
you
kind
were
of a weird little
saying,
part.
yeah, you were saying earlier though that, you know, in your, I like the way, I know I'm picking up how you do your research and you don't leave any stone unturned. There's no record of anyone talking to thousands of people though, is there? This is what
No,
was, yeah.
no, there's not. Yeah. Yeah. No,
You would
not at all.
you would think if he, you know, someone would write something down about a guy who drew thousands of people to him and, you know, was performing miracles and doing this and doing that, but there is not a lot of actual record of him ever doing any of these things in a
Right.
literal sense.
Right. Well, so the argument then in this is that you've got Pontius Pilate, who's going to represent Sagittarius.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And, you know, oh, and yeah, to your point, if you look back at Judas as well, there's a lot of contradictory stories in Matthew and Acts. And because in one of them, I think they say that Judas returns the money and he hangs himself. And then there's another one that says he uses the money to buy a field and then he falls and dies of an accident.
Right.
So you have these two contradictory stories, excuse me, that don't, you know, so it's really kind of unclear, well, what did happen to Judas? And then you have all these people trying to explain why it's not clear through Christianity, and you never get like a thorough. So I think, you know, this kind of murkiness of it raises the question of, okay, what exactly was the point of this Judas story and all of that, you know? So, you know, then you've got, like I said, Pontius Pilate putting Jesus to death.
Mm-hmm.
And then that gets us all the way back to the beginning of the Zodiac, where you know, we've already talked about this kind of solar metaphor.
Yeah.
A little bit, but like now's the time I think to probably just jump right into that bad boy, because you have something really interesting that happens in this time of year. So after the summer solstice occurs, if you're again observing from the Holy Land at this time, then what you see is essentially the sun, which moves lower and lower and lower down. Eventually, after the 21st, if you're observing on the horizon, the sun actually dips down below the horizon on the 22nd of December. So, you know, as you've been watching the sun go lower and lower all year long, now you get to this day where you can't see it anymore. And it stays that way for 3 days.
So for 3 days.
The 22nd, the 23rd, and the 24th, it's below the horizon where we can't see it. And then the miracle is on the 25th, when the sun shifts 1 degree north upward and then can just barely be seen by the naked eye on the horizon, and the sun is therefore reborn. So you've got this very clear metaphor in there explaining the death and rebirth of the sun. And then you've got your complete 1 year cycle all the way around the Zodiac and beyond, you know, and it just keeps going again and again. So, yeah, you know, this really blew my mind, you know, in terms of, if you ask scientists, you know, again, going back to what I said before about religion, they're going to tell you it's a representative of all these things. But, you know, I just took you through the Zodiac piece by piece for the Jesus story that utilizes all the details that all of these religious figures share. And so for me, it tells the story of, okay, this is a mechanism that's been used to share information. And then during the Council of Nicaea, it was decided that they were going to take this mythology and turn it into a political control mechanism, as you were saying before. And I think that's where we really take the story of Jesus and run. And from that point, you have the Dark Ages, the Crusades, the Inquisition. I mean, you just have this horrible time period of death and destruction and mayhem.
All in the name of God. It
makes me wonder. Right. Yeah. You know, and that's what a sin, because you look back and, you know, I alluded to this a little bit, but, you know, I had a very profound mystical experience. And And I know that a lot of, a lot of people, I'm not claiming to be special. I think that a lot of people have these experiences in ways, different shapes and forms. And, born again Christians have an experience they can't process. So they call it a mystical experience, and they find Jesus because of it. And if you go through all the books and all the prophecies, it's always someone has an experience they can't process. And then they try to describe it, and they're so excited about what they've experienced that they're going around telling everybody about it, and they're preaching the word.
Yes.
And so you have this consistent belief of this experience with the divine, and then it impacting you in a huge way. And if you go back to the mysteries were doing exactly this. They were telling us that, whether it be a psychedelic experience or, the secret societies have all sorts of experiences and initiations that involve hallucinogens.
Yes.
To invoke that experience.
To invoke that experience.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
I mean, if you think, I was sort of, I had two, right? So so when I did DMT the first time, that definitely showed me the way out of where I was at. And I've always said that, my DMT experience is the reason I'm sitting here today, because it showed me through. And if you think about it, it was almost like, wasn't light, but it was like love. But you feel like it was light, right? I was shown the universal love that was possible, right? And that then set me free and allowed me to be who I needed to be. And then when I nearly died in 2013, that was very profound. I came out of that and I'm like, okay, well, what am I doing with myself now? What is my legacy? What am I actually doing here? And here we are. You're part of that, right? This is your second episode on this is my legacy. This is what I'm doing, and you're right. You do want to spread the word. You do want to, this was an amazing experience. And for those people that haven't had that, I suppose they try and latch onto that, don't they? I think they just found the right mechanism to make everybody latch onto it, I suppose. And then they externalize it. Oh no, you can't have it. You can't achieve it, but you can try to achieve it. I mean, I heard I'd forgotten that the printing press created the 30 Years' War. That was, and this is part of what we're talking about here, isn't it? It's like externalizing the God self. Now you can be the story. You don't need this priest or whatever to translate for you. You can read it yourself, and then you can be part of the story. It's crazy, man. I'd never heard about it. That's really interesting. So you're saying that and fairly easy to map out, that the story, that year-long story of Jesus, is basically a trip through the Zodiac. And
absolutely, man. Absolutely.
Wow.
And, there's a couple other details we didn't quite get to. Like, for instance, the Star of the East and the Three Kings.
Yeah.
So this is important to understand. So the Star of the East is Sirius. And, on December 25th, what happens is Sirius lines up essentially with Orion's belt, which are, those three stars are often called the three magi or the three kings.
Yep.
So you have the three magi, and then you have the star in the east, Sirius, lining up to point directly at the sunrise on December 25th.
Yeah.
So that's why we keep hearing in these stories of these religious icons of the three magi following the star in the east to the birth of the Savior.
Yeah.
Right. So it's very clear. I mean, these are astronomical phenomena that can't be debated. And then, you have this alignment pointing to the sunrise, and, boom, that's explained,
Isn't there something to do with the gifts as well? Like the myrrh and the frankincense and the frankincense, the myrrh, and what else? I can't remember the last one, but there's symbology behind all those as well, isn't there? Like the with the
Yes.
rebirth and all that sort of stuff as well.
Yeah, and those become a little more traditional in terms of, Christians explaining that and using that. But the idea of these three magi is definitely rooted in this alignment between Orion's belt and Sirius. And, because that's something that people would notice in that time of year if they were, staring up into the sky, observing, which I just find to be totally, really, really interesting.
It's very interesting, mate. It's very. What was the earliest incarnation you found of this story? Was it the Egyptian, or was it the Sumerian, or where how far back did it go?
It's everywhere as far as I can tell. I see a lot of similarities in the Sumerian myth, but really it pops off in Egypt. I think, and I'll be honest with you, I've been studying and researching these mysteries for as far back as I can remember, and I happen to have I've worked in restaurants my whole life, and I worked at a restaurant in the Chicago area, and there was a priest who was very kind of high up. He was, kind of high up in the Catholic faith, and I got to know him really well over time. And it was interesting because it was during that time that I was in college, and I was taking a comparative religious studies class.
Yeah.
And my teacher made a point. She never wanted to tell anyone what her religion was. So she, and she always said, I'm not going to tell you I am religious. I'm not going to tell you what my religion is, because I don't want it to influence what we're talking about in this, in the class. And then at the very end of class one day, she said, all right, anybody who's interested in knowing about what religion I am, this was the last day. She said, you can stay after class and we'll talk about it. And I was super, super curious because she was a really interesting woman and had a lot of great takes.
Yeah.
And so, I was like, oh, I'm there. And it was like me and like two other people that were just trying to get A's, I think, and so I was like, all right, I want to know, and she started talking about it. And she explained that she was a member of the Church of Isis. And she even went on to explain how the Church of Isis and the Temple of Isis religion is the foundation for all these modern religions. And it was funny because it wasn't until later that I remembered this story. And I was like, oh, wait a minute, that's right. She said that. And so, I started kind of poking around, but what really jumped out at me was, again, the story of this priest, right? So he used to come into this restaurant that I was working at, and we got to know each other and we talked a lot. And eventually he got real comfortable with me. And again, I was at that phase where I was just reading nothing but esoteric philosophy, and I was asking him questions and kind of getting a feed on him. And he admitted to me in privacy, I mean, I'm not saying his name, so I think I'll be okay to admit it, but he admitted to me that he also was a member of the Temple of Isis.
Wow.
And he kind of described it like, kind of like a Freemasonry thing, kind of like this club, but this temple is rooted in Rosicrucianism and esoteric philosophy. So here you have a prominent Catholic priest who's the head of a university admitting to me that he is a member of the Temple of Isis. So, at the time, I didn't really understand all that. I just found it to be interesting. And then later on, I'm starting to really think about all these things, and I start to see like, wait a minute, this is no coincidence,
No,
this is
definitely not.
This guy admitted to me, and this teacher admitted to me that they were, unrelated to each other and both in my life at the time. And they were members of this old religion that was rooted in a religion based on my research that's been unnamed. And so when you're researching this thing, the deeper you go, the more you just fall into things that are like the unnamed religion. I've heard of, I found some references called the religion of the Magi.
Yes, the Magi,
which I found was interesting because of the Orion belt correlation.
Yeah.
But I think it goes back to our conversation we were having before, and back to the point of unlocking the code, which is, as we're trying to understand these civilizations that existed, that shared all this knowledge and passed it down, we end up asking these big questions. Who was this civilization? Clearly, they taught a story that got retold again and again and again, and eventually used for political gain.
Yeah, that's
And
right. That's right. And if you think it's buried within, yeah, you've blown my mind. I'd never thought about it like that. Thank you very much. It's everything I thought it would be, Dan. Thank you. And it adds another layer, you know. And you're right. You know, the purpose of unlocking the code, like it already occurred to me that there was, these echoes continue to happen. You know, I
mhm,
mean, I wouldn't have said to you literally a week ago that Italy has polygonal masonry all over Italy. It's like, hey, what? What do you mean there's polygonal masonry all over Italy? But there is,
yeah, yeah,
okay, um, which provides us with another echo. And then
mhm,
all you've done today is you've taken the most common story that we know and put it through the astrological cycle that we all know, that no one knows where it started from, you know, like you said,
mhm,
beginning of time stuff. But then you think about, okay, because you know that's the discussion we always have. It's like, yeah, cool. They put stones in a circle. How did they know what a circle was? Well, they
mhm,
were relating a story back to the stars. That's, you know, in order to have this story of harvest and growth and rebirth and death, and they had to observe the stars. In order to observe the stars, they had to come up with the mathematic principles on how to, you know, build these temples to make them align and all this sort of stuff. Yeah, I really think it is another more growing evidence of this civilization,
mhm.
this where science and spirituality were one without I'm going to say not precedence, without I'm trying to find the word, without the control that's on it now, right? I think everybody, again, cultural differences depending on where you were on the planet, obviously. However, it seems to be it was an accepted method of teaching, doesn't it? You know,
Mhm.
like how is it that we find, like I said, the medicine wheel or the sun cross or whichever way you want to put it was, you know, if that Stonehenge here down under was still existing, it'd predate uh, the Stonehenge in England by thousands and thousands of years, and the
Mhm.
key at both ends of that stone arrangement was the sun cross or the medicine wheel or that alchemical symbol or the Coptic cross or whichever way you want to go. You know, like
Mhm.
the echoes through time just are getting louder and louder. You know, and I sincerely hope that, you know, through guys like yourself doing your research and everything else like that, that we seem to be, it's like we're circling, right? But we're getting closer. We're getting closer into that inner circle as to the why. You know, I don't know whether the who matters much anymore. I think it was a global understanding,
Mhm.
but it's more about what if we could take that story and make it, instead of having the control that it is now, seeing that story for what it is and understanding that it is it's the human representation. You know, it is like we started this
Mhm.
conversation. It is the eternal story. It is the light versus the dark. It's the, you know, making sure we can sustain our existence. But more than that, it's about understanding that the light and dark exist within you. It's about the God self. It's about, it
Absolutely.
all comes together, man. It's all the same. It's so fascinating, mate. It's so fascinating.
Yeah, and obviously I feel like my pursuit for understanding is running parallel to yours, whereas I'm looking at really focused on the esoteric philosophy. You're really focused on the architecture.
Mm.
Um, One thing that I want to kind of throw out there, and hopefully maybe some of your listeners, or I would love any answers to this that anybody can come up with, and hit me up on Twitter, hit me up on Instagram if you do. But the one thing that I keep finding fascinating is the sixth century. The sixth century just keeps coming up again and again and again.
Yeah.
And I talked about earlier, for some reason, modern astrology is rooted in where the stars were in the sixth century, and
Mm-hmm.
we identify with astrology based on that time.
Mm-hmm.
But you also had all over the world, you suddenly had this explosion happening where you had Lao Tzu started teaching, Confucius started teaching, the
Mm-hmm.
Buddhists started teaching, Pythagoras was teaching. You had the Christian prophets. I want to say it was maybe uh, Josiah and maybe there was Christian prophets that were teaching during this time.
Mm-hmm.
And so there's this major consciousness shift
Mm-hmm.
that occurs in humanity in the 6th century.
Is that,
and I can't figure it out, man.
Is that coming out of the Dark Age, or is that, where does that sit? I'm trying to.
It leads to the Enlightenment long term. I mean, it's way off, but I feel like there's something that happened where, you know, who knows? Maybe the group came out and said it's time to start, you know, moving the message along, right? Because everything was very primitive before that.
It's interesting. Like, there seems to be again, our hubris tells us we're so confident of the timeline, but there's massive gaps in the timeline. You know, like, we don't have, there's a 400 year period of the Dark Ages there, but we've got no idea what happened. No one knows, right? No one knows. It was the Dark Ages. We don't know who, what, where, when anything was going on. No one really knows. You know, because I thought it was 6th century, but it's not, because the Masons, say, like, it's 6022 now for the Masons, right? In the Masonic calendar, it is the year 6022. So
I wasn't aware of that.
Yeah. My question is, what happened for 4000 BC? But you know, I've spoken to some Egyptologists about that. You know, what happened at 4000 BC? No one seems to know. Yet the Masons marked that as their 0 date. So it's like, well, that can't be true. Something obviously went down there. I think there's these periods in history where we get an uptick of knowledge, we get an uptick of understanding, and these questions and these explorations, you know, as you say, that led to the Enlightenment. But 600. So we're saying BC, 600 BC, or just 600?
Or no, I'm sorry. BC. Yeah. So, but what's really blowing my mind, though, is to think about this. So if you think of the impact of on culture of
6th century
Pythagoras, Lao Tzu, 80,
sorry.
So when you think about no, you're right. Yeah, it's 80. I'm sorry. But when you think about the impact of, like, okay, Lao Tzu, Confucius, Buddha, Pythagoras, like, these were major shifts in human consciousness.
Absolutely. Big uptick in consciousness. Yeah.
Huge, man. Huge. And so it's like, what drove that? Like, how did that, how was this happening all over the world at the same time, where these religions were really getting solidified and popped up, and this story was being hammered out? And, you know, so it's really fascinating. I think there's some answers there if we can somehow someday figure out what happened then and why that was so important.
We just add that date to when we can get the DeLorean to work, mate. We just add 600 AD to that date. We go and pop back then and see what's going on.
Yep.
So what else have you got for us, mate? Because being aware of your time and my time, what else have you got for us to begin to? Oh, the Eye of Horus. Oh yes, the old pineal gland.
Yes, sir.
Apparently, recently, did I post it on the page? Apparently, they've found piezoelectric crystals in minute amounts inside the pineal gland, which means it is actually truly a receiver.
Yeah, absolutely, man. And this is, I wanted to pull this slide up because, obviously you've got, the symbol of the Illuminati, which the Bavarian Illuminati, we know, merged with the Freemason Lodge. And so this imagery, I think, was important because this all-seeing eye is something that's permeated all culture since the beginning. And,
absolutely, yeah.
I got down on the bottom left, you've got, the eye that you pointed out behind you, the Eye of Horus, or I'm sorry, Ra. And then you've got...
Well, if I move the camera, the Eye of Horus is above the bookcase. Yeah.
Okay, got it.
Yeah.
But if you look at this imagery, you see that this idea of the pyramid, the eye, this is all associated. So, from American money all the way back to, Egyptian understanding. And you really see these ideas where this symbolism is all interconnected. And we have to ask who's been telling these stories and connecting these things for so long. And it's funny. My friend pointed out how much Masonic imagery was present at, not only the American Super Bowl, but the Oscars, in which was talked about, of course, for Will Smith smacking Chris Rock for whatever that was about. But, the imagery has always been laced in there. And once you start to notice it, you can't unsee it. Man.
You can't unsee it, And you talk about the Eye of Horus being pretty much a spitting image of the pineal gland as a cross section. I mean, how do you even begin to understand that? Look, the Masonic symbology, and again, I think we may have another. You take the Masons. I think the Masons are the echo of the builder culture. However, at the same time, they took something that was pretty pure, I think, and they've manipulated it for their own control and gain. And the symbology that you see, I mean, again, that's in the triptych architecture of all the cathedrals and stuff like that. Like, I don't know if you started to look at your cathedrals in your hometown and started to see the Masonic symbols and the pagan symbology buried in those churches. Go and have a look at that. It's crazy. And when we talk about symbols, it's more than Masonic, right? I think there's 32 symbols that are not only found in rock art dating back, to the Lascaux, dating back to stuff found in Arnhem Land, but echo around the globe. Every single continent, every single culture has one or more or all of these symbols woven into it, right? And then those symbols, again, if you look at the Masonic stuff, they've taken a more detailed version of that symbol and used that in their own architecture, in their own doctrine, in their own philosophy. And there's these things that echo, again, they just continue to echo throughout time, that the layman doesn't even know what they're looking at, right? It's like, and like you just said, it's hard to, once you've seen, it is hard to unsee, right? And I think, we are, you want to talk about cycles, that you talk about the yugas, and obviously we are now in the Kali Yuga, the time of chaos, which is quite clear to people who can see. But there's a whole heap of symbology that comes with that if you start looking into that. And that symbology has been echoed and echoed and echoed, right? There's nothing new in the zoo, just because the amount of people that we've now put on this planet and the way that we've developed it doesn't mean that the ideas and the cycles of time and everything else that these people have been looking into for, let's face it, we don't know, Dan. Could it be hundreds of thousands of years? It possibly could be. Like, we have no idea. We don't know. And they continue to echo, right? And I think it's important to, researchers like yourself and myself, and, we know a heap of other people that are doing their own independent research. It's so important to be able to look at these things and point them out so we can gain better understanding. Because if we don't, we're in trouble. We need to start to, there's a reason that our ancestors look to the sky. There's a reason that our ancestors worship the sun. There's a reason that, they monitored the cycles of the sun. They monitored the cycles of the stars. They were mapping these things because it's important. Yeah. Right. Whereas we, as you say, I mean, I wouldn't have even known the Oscars were on if Will Smith didn't, that thing didn't happen. But that's the reality, like that we focus and you've got to ask the question, are these grand distractions distracting us from our work? Like, I think, we had a bit of a discussion before we turned the mics on. It's like, how do you've just got to refocus on your work now, right? You can't get caught up. We can't influence what's going on. However, the work that we're doing is important. This work's important. People need to know that the story of Jesus is a cycle through the is moving through the bloody, I've lost it. What am I trying to say? Moving through the star signs. What am I trying to say?
The Zodiac.
The bloody Zodiac. Yeah. Jesus. Yeah. Excuse me, mate. It's nearly time for me to stop. I think I'm fading a little bit. However, look, I think when people need to know that stuff because that gains us better understanding, and it makes total sense. But in order to be objective, you've got to remain focused and not distracted by the eternal distractions that seem to be placed in front of us, so we don't look deeper, right? That's the whole point, isn't it? Right? If we don't look deeper into this stuff, we're never going to learn what the lessons are, and history will repeat itself. You know?
Yeah, no, absolutely, man. And this has been a lot of fun for me, and I really enjoyed it. It's given me an opportunity to have a reason to really enjoy this research, and coming on and talking with you and sharing it with you has been cool. And so, one thing I wanted to mention is that just for fun, I'm going to throw another podcast into the world. Me and a couple of friends I talked to you a little bit about this, but we're calling it the 231 Gates, and we're going to do deep dives into topics like this and compare research. And I would love to have you on at some point.
Yeah, please, mate. Please.
Which would be super fun. One of the things that, I'm really excited to kind of talk about and really delve deep into is these, this history laid down by the secret societies that's becoming more and more available now to understand is all about consciousness and the evolution of consciousness driving life, because right now we've got the materialists are winning, right? They've convinced us science is the new religion. You're not allowed to ask any questions outside of the doctrine, or you'll be persecuted, like every other major religion. But, these same forces behind closed doors are teaching this dramatically different version of human history that's rooted in the evolution of consciousness.
That's right. They're teaching when you become part of these esoteric cults, I suppose, for want of a better term, you are learning about the God self. It's not the history that is taught to the generic everyday person is far from what is being taught. And I think that's, here at Unlocking the Code, that's where we focus on. It's like, no, it is about consciousness. It's about evolving consciousness. It's about dealing with your issues and your demons and finding a way through that and understanding that you have the tools and the tips and the tricks within you to do that. And that's what these things are about. And so what we're going to call it, mate? The 231 gates.
We're calling it the 231 gates, which is a concept that comes from the Sefer Yetzirah in Kabbalah, Jewish religion.
Okay. Yeah, I was going to say, I knew that 231 was a Jewish thing.
Yeah. When you see it, put up as a picture, it's essentially a mandala, and the mandala exists in every culture. It's the flowering of life from the center out around back to the center. And it's interesting, not to, I know we're going to get off here, but just to leave with this point. One of the things that I found really interesting in my study of esoteric secret societies and philosophy is when you start to look at the book of Revelation, which we talked a little bit about earlier, they have a belief in this and what it represents. And what they teach, we can't get into it all right now, it's huge, but the big thing that they teach, which I found to be very interesting as I'm a student of meditation and a student of shamanism, is they look at the, I'll just leave you with this image where they talk about, in Revelation talks about the opening of the 7 seals.
Yes.
And, that's been interpreted 100 different ways. But what the secret societies teach is that what this is that they're essentially saying that once man becomes aware of the power of human consciousness, both collective and individual, and they're willing to do the personal work to elevate your personal vibration and essentially unlock the 7 chakras, which 7 is all over every religion everywhere. The 7 ways. We could go on and on. Seven's
one of those magic numbers of the universe, Dan.
Yeah. And what they're teaching is that the opening of the 7 seals is the opening of the 7 chakras. And when collective human consciousness can vibrate high enough to where we're able as a population to open those 7 chakras like meditators do and yogis and adepts, then essentially everything would open up, right? And you would have this post out of the age of chaos into the age of Aquarius.
Absolutely.
And so I just found that to be hugely profound.
That's what we're aiming for. I think, I'm deep in some personal work at the moment to help me accelerate that process, and I think, and it's interesting, the work never ends. I think when you're on that path, I can only do the work I'm doing now because of the work that I've done before. Like I'm able to delve into that next level. It made me. I've got a meme somewhere. I've got a meme problem, right? I don't know. You got a kind of meme issue, but one of the memes I've got saved somewhere. It's like, wait till everyone figures out that they're God. Shit's going to get real weird.
Yeah, yeah.
Because it's true.
Yeah.
We are. We are. Well, mate, what I thought, I had a bit of the instinct. We were talking about esoteric wisdom and all that sort of stuff. So I thought Dr. Bodhi Sanders might come and play. So,
oh, nice.
The way of the warriorhood, mate. So I'll do the trick, and let's see what the book's got for us today. See if it can.
Awesome.
Oh, there you go. All right, let's have a look. Truth is not a matter of personal viewpoint. Okay. Many can speak words of wisdom, few can practice it themselves. Wow. And I mean, if you just think about the truth that we've been trying to talk about all day today, it's not a matter of our personal viewpoint. It's a matter of, it is what it is. It's echoing through time. These things are these things. It doesn't matter who you are, doesn't matter where you're from, doesn't matter what you do. The truth of the human experience is the truth of the human experience. It's not a personal viewpoint.
Yeah, that's beautiful, man.
Many can speak the words of wisdom, few can practice it themselves. And I think that's just got to, and again, I read that and I'm like, yes, that's true. And it is in practice, right? You want to be the God self, you want to do the things we're talking about, activate your chakras, you've got to practice.
That's it, man. That's it. And
you can't,
that's our only hope, because as we've seen, you can't change the world. You can only empower and change and elevate yourself. And in doing that, you're going to affect people for the better around you, and you're going to inspire others to do it. And
absolutely,
the quicker we can get down along that path, the sooner we can achieve what it is that we're trying to do as a culture. And I have, as depressing as it gets, and as hard as it is for me sometimes to see, I'm really still very optimistic and very idealistic in the sense that I really have a lot of faith that there's some light at the end of the tunnel, and hopefully a good ending to this story.
Yeah, I agree, man. I agree. It's like, as much as you look outside and you see not a lot of hope, we have conversations like this, and I know that you and your friends are doing your work over in the States. Me and my friends are doing my work. I've got connections all over the globe, and we're all trying. We're all really attempting to move that ball forward. And as long as we all do that, as I say, wait till everyone figures out that they're God. Stuff's going to get weird.
Yeah, no. And I said it to you last time. I think it's really important, this idea that I joke around about of the intellectual light web.
Yes. Yes.
We really need people out there pushing the boundaries and asking the questions and being open-minded. That as there's so many things we don't understand, whether it's UFOs or psychic abilities or this or that or the other, and we try to understand those things. The only way we're ever going to do it is if we start to have a more multidimensional approach to how we're perceiving reality. And I assume once we really understand that, I think we'll be where we need to be in terms of understanding. And I look forward to that pursuit.
Absolutely, man. Well, listen, hey, thank you very much for your time. You blew my mind again. Always plenty to talk about. And look, please, I'd love to come on the 231 gates. I've got stuff ready to go, or if there's something particularly you want me to talk about, I'm more than happy. Whatever I can do when that launches, you let me know. I'll do everything I can to help get you guys off the ground, and would love to be a part of it, mate.
That's awesome, man. Thank you. And do me a favor. Shout out to Angus, man. I love him as part of the crew over there, and I would love to get him on there and talk to him and pick his brain a little bit too. So yeah, man. Well, listen, we can now with this new setup, I can hook him up over there as well. So if you want him to come on as well, give us a topic you want us to dig into, and we'll do our best, man, and we'll have a sit down. That sounds great, man. All right. Hey, you take care of yourself, get better. I'll throw some love and vibes out there into the universe for you, because I know when I was getting over that stuff, a lot of people were doing that for me, and
I appreciate
I had
that,
some
man.
pretty profound experiences afterwards as a result of that. So,
No, I
got to
appreciate
stay
that.
open-minded, man. Got to stay hopeful.
Always, dude. Always. Thanks, mate. Look after yourself, eh?
All right, man. You
Cheers,
take
mate.
care, Triffin. Thank you.
Just want to go again?
Let's do it.
Yeah.
Go again.
All right. I know you been here before. No surprises settle the score. I know the darkness deep inside. Reckless rage, poison pride. I know the anger, I know the pain, and I know the fear we do not name. And the one who comes to find me when my time is through, I know you, I know you. Wow! I know you. Better.